is gathered goes to the God before. All is known of the Cybermen. The reductions, the speculations, drawn from the 10 Earth documents, the knowledge of the eyes. You are chosen to learn of the early Cybermen, Cybermen and Cyberfaction, those whose origins are traced and told elsewhere in the Cyber Hive, those whose shadows fall on many a civilization before their story is done. Of the early Cybermen, the episodes you're about to hear tell us all we know. 5 attempted invasions of Earth. But from these fragments, Archivis Sedalia has pieced together a larger, clearer picture. Listen, and the picture will unfold in your mind. Listen well. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. For where there is light and learning, the shadow of the Cybermen is never far behind.
Tobias Vaughan headed Earth's largest electronic company, International Electromatics, IE. He believed Earth's difficulties could be solved through the leadership of a single man who was strong enough to force the world to bow to his will. Moreover, he believed himself to be that man. First Invasion of Earth. Document 1. The period was sometime during the 1970s AD. Tobias Vaughan had made contact with some powerful allies, a group of aliens called the Cybermen. They required an Earth-based agent to provide a radio beam to guide their invasion fleet to Earth. In his megalomania, Vaughan believed the Cybermen would subjugate the nations of Earth to make way for his wise leadership. That it was he who controlled the cyber troops, which were secretly massing in London, one of Earth's major cities. In reality, it was the ruthless intelligence of the Cybermen which was masterminding the insidious plan at every stage. The plan was this. Every product of Tobias Vaughan's company contained a micro-monolithic circuit, a kind of artificial nervous system. When activated by cyber technology, it would produce an hypnotic effect on humans in the vicinity, rendering them unconscious. Since millions of IE products have been sold throughout the world, the effect would be global. Cyber troops would emerge from the sewers to deal with any pockets of resistance, and the main cyber invasion fleet, hundreds of small spacecraft housed within a huge control ship hidden beyond the moon, would make its way to Earth and establish total control. Such was the plan. For 5 years it had been in preparation. Then suddenly, the cyber control ship detected the presence of a small blue craft which seemed to materialize close to them in space. Taking it to be a threat to the imminent invasion, the Cybermen attempted to destroy the unidentified object. Their missile did not hit its target, which yet seemed to vanish. They were to discover that the mysterious object was indeed known to them from a previous encounter, unrecorded in any of the cyber documents, and that their immediate suspicions were entirely founded. The blue box and its passengers constituted a great threat to cyber intentions of conquering the Earth. The spacecraft was in fact a Gallifreyan time-traveling vessel, whose owner was the Doctor, a Time Lord of Gallifrey. He had undergone one bodily regeneration already, and is thus designated here as Doctor 2. Since his machine was based on the principles of time and relative dimensions in space, he called it the TARDIS. He was invariably accompanied by fellow travelers. His present companions were called Zoe and Jamie. In line with the principles on which it worked, the TARDIS's internal dimensions were not related to its external dimensions. It could be larger on the inside than its outward appearance would suggest. Indeed, its outward appearance was doubly deceptive, because one of its circuits, known as the chameleon circuit, enabled the TARDIS to blend in with its surroundings. Due to malfunction, it remains in the likeness of a mid-20th century police box. Though puzzled as to the nature of the attack made against him, the Doctor had dematerialized the TARDIS in time to avoid the approaching missile. He and his companions landed in an English field, by coincidence, part of IE property, occupied by a domesticated species of Earth animal exploited for its milk, the cow. The Doctor decided to overhaul the TARDIS. An old friend of his, Professor Travers, belonged to this era and would be able to assist. Removing the malfunctioning visual stabilizer circuits and thus rendering the TARDIS invisible, the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe set off for the Professor's London home. Professor Travers was away, and his house had been let to a Professor Watkins. His niece, Isabel, told them that her uncle had recently gone to work for International Electromatics, on highly secret work. She had not heard from him since. The Doctor decided to investigate. After some manhandling by IE staff, he and Jamie eventually managed to speak to Tobias Vaughan himself, who avoided giving anything away about Professor Watkins, but persuaded the Doctor to hand over the faulty circuits in order that IE might repair them. As they were ushered out, the Doctor's vague suspicions were far from calmed. Tobias Vaughan, he noted, did not blink like a human. Before long, the Doctor and Jamie had met up with an old friend, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. For the Brigadier, their last meeting had been 4 years ago, though in Jamie and the Doctor's unique time stream, it had only been a matter of weeks. At that time, a creature called the Yeti had threatened London. The United Nations Intelligence Task Force, UNIT, had since been formed to provide global defense against any similar incidents. The Brigadier led the British division of UNIT, and he had been keeping International Electromatics under surveillance. There was growing proof that for years, UFO activity had centered around IE property, and that it had recently intensified. The Doctor was eager to help the Brigadier discover more. Behind a sliding wall of Vaughan's office was a highly sophisticated device, a communications link with cyber control. It had the appearance of a swollen-brained, skeletal machine creature. Let us call it the Coordinator. Analysis of the Doctor's borrowed circuits had shown them to be alien. Vaughan was intrigued and showed photographs of the Doctor and Jamie to the Coordinator. Its uninflected voice informed him that they were both registered in cyber records as hostile and recognized from having been on Planet 14, to which they traveled using a machine.
They are dangerous and must be destroyed,
intoned the Coordinator. Vaughan agreed to ensure their destruction. But his interest had been aroused, and he wanted to discover more about the Doctor's spacecraft. Part of his plan to keep control over the Cybermen lay with the device that Professor Watkins had invented, the Cerebratron Mentor. It had been developed as a gentle teaching device to induce emotional changes in the subject. Deducing that emotions were profoundly alien to Cybermen, Vaughan had forced Watkins to intensify the machine's effect. It might be possible to use it as a weapon against his allies, should it become necessary. But if all failed, the Doctor's machine might provide a useful means of escape from the Cybermen. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Jamie were watching Vaughan's men, who appeared superhumanly strong, carrying large crates which were to be transported out of the IE compound. Audio rejection capsules had been implanted in Vaughan and the people who worked for him to protect them from the effect of cyber-hypnosis. To aid them further, the Cybermen partly converted their bodies to give them extra strength, as witnessed by the Doctor and Jamie. To avoid detection, Jamie had to hide in one of the crates and was disturbed to find that it seemed to contain a living thing, wrapped in some dense fibrous material. Later, they looked on in horror as Vaughan's technicians applied electrodes to one of these enshrouded objects. The covering burst asunder, and out stepped a Cyberman. Cyberman, Document 1, Early Cyberfaction. Powerful cybernetic limbs, whose movements are guided by intricate links of exoskeletal rods, allow it to stride purposefully towards its mission. On each side of its head are muff-like striated blocks, out of which protrude antennae, audio-sensing devices perhaps. They bend upwards, then inwards, and connect with a bulge at the top of the cranium. On the blank face are two black holes where eyes might once have been. At each eye, a teardrop shape is etched where no tear has ever welled. The slit for a mouth betrays no expression, apart from cold resolve, and the chin beneath falls weakly away to a thick, smooth neck. At the chest, there is mounted a bulky multi-purpose device whose central column is topped by a lens which projects deadly rays. The rest of the column is given over to 4 control knobs. On either side are vented wings suggesting further functions of the unit: respiratory aid, cleansing filter, cooling equipment, energy pack. These daunting beings were familiar to Jamie and the Doctor from encounters which this history has yet to describe. The Cyberman which stood before them, however, was somewhat different, of an earlier, less developed type than those they had confronted previously. For the Doctor, the sight was of extraordinary interest. He later described them to the Brigadier as inhuman killers from another world. Towering above normal-sized humans, enfleshed in some silvery, virtually indestructible metal-plastic alloy, the Cyberman was humanoid in form, but far from human in behavior or appearance. Brought back to consciousness after who knows how long in suspended animation, this mechanized creature showed no sign of confusion, but immediately departed to swell the ranks of cyber troops infiltrating the sewers of London. Jamie and the Doctor had hard information for the Brigadier, who might now persuade his superiors that UNIT must raid International Electromatics to preempt whatever malignity Tobias Vaughan and the Cybermen were preparing. But such a course of action was to prove less than straightforward. As Zoe recalled,
the Cybermen have means of controlling people's minds.
Indeed, cyber mind control techniques had already been used on the Brigadier's immediate superior, General Rutledge. blocking Lethbridge Stewart's requests to attack the warehouses where cyber cocoons were still being activated, Rutledge immediately alerted Vaughan, and the deadline for cyber invasion was brought forward. Professor Watkins, under duress, had produced a more powerful version of his Cerebritron mentor. Vaughan needed confirmation that a machine would give him control over Cybermen, so a partly resuscitated Cyberman was induced with fear. Like any emotion, it was totally alien to the cyber system. The effect was devastating. Squealing pitifully, it flailed its arms in a desperate attempt to escape the searing stabs of pure emotion and stumbled blindly towards the sewers. A rogue Cyberman on the loose. The experiment had been a success. It proved to Vaughan that the Cybermen were not indestructible. Their bodies might be strong, but their minds had weaknesses still. As the cyber control ship came from behind the moon, the hypnotic signal was beamed towards Earth. The world's population fell unconscious. Fortunately, the doctor had guessed how cyber hypnosis might be induced, and as in document 4, neuristas were taped to the back of the neck to depolarize the signal. Zoe, Jamie, the Brigadier's unit group, and the doctor himself were thus able to remain alert. But against the might of the Cybermen, they were few. In space, the first half of the cyber invasion fleet emerged from the control ship, while on Earth, manhole covers were flung open to disgorge a resolute stream of cyber troops. The invasion had begun. UNIT had already discovered how formidable Cybermen could be. They had attempted to contain a group in the sewers.
We dropped 5 grades right on top of them, and one of them still came out of it. I'd hate to have to face a whole army of them,
said one officer. But a cyber army was precisely what they now confronted. Undaunted, UNIT initiated a defensive plan. It proceeded on 2 fronts. A Russian moon probe was to be loaded with a nuclear warhead and aimed at the cyber control ship to end the transmission of hypnotic control. And missiles at a British base were to be fired at the invasion fleet as soon as it was detected by radar. Ironically, the only area now free of the Cybermen was the sewers. Through them, the doctor made his way to the IE building. There, he found that Vaughan still believed he could maintain control over the Cybermen, that it was he who had masterminded everything, that the Cybermen were merely providing superior technological techniques and a mighty army to do his will. The doctor warned in vain that they would destroy Earth. Vaughan began transmission of the vital radio beam, and the coordinator announced that the first of the invasion fleet's 2 waves was on its way. But the fleet had been detected at the missile base. Zoe, with her 21st century mathematical prowess, had calculated the most effective trajectory for the few missiles at their disposal. Her calculations proved deadly accurate. A chain reaction of destruction obliterated the entire first wave of the Cybermen's transporter fleet. The coordinator announced the destruction of the first fleet and laid the blame on their erstwhile ally. A cyber megatron bomb was now to
Destroy life on Earth completely, every living being.
Vaughan, crazed with humiliation and frustration as his long-awaited dream became nightmare, turned the Cerebritron mentor on the coordinator. The intensity of the emotion produced caused the communication device to malfunction and explode. Vaughan was at length persuaded to lead the doctor to the radio transmitter, which had been guiding the invasion fleet, and was now directing the cyberbomb to Earth. As the nuclear-armed moon rocket was launched from Russia, the Doctor and Vaughn made their way to the IE warehouse, where the radio transmitter was located. Many Cybermen were guarding the area. Units, smaller weapons, had proved ineffective against them, though the Cybermen's handheld guns were deadly against humans. However, with larger weapons, mortar and bazooka, the cyber forces were held in check. Armed with the Cerebriton Mentor, Vaughn reached the transmitter, but was shot down. Unit men finally ended its transmissions and destroyed the other Cybermen in the compound. The supercooled hydrogen warhead on the Russian rocket reached its target and vaporized the cyber control ship and the cyber bomb. On Earth, people began to regain consciousness. Such was the nature of the hypnosis, it must be assumed, that none were aware of the missing hours in their day. It remained the knowledge of a special few that this first invasion of the Cybermen had taken place at all. The Doctor repaired his circuits, and he and his two companions were returned to the field of cows. They made their farewells to the Brigadier and disappeared, literally, into the invisible TARDIS. Document 1 provoked many interesting questions. For example, though the first wave of the cyber invasion fleet was destroyed, we hear nothing of the second wave. Is it possible that before the Russian warhead hit the cyber control ship, several of the small cybercraft evacuated, escaping certain destruction to face uncertain survival in space? Did some indeed survive and go on to other conquests? Some answers will be found in documents 2 and 3. They chronicle 2 further invasions of Earth. The next cyber invasion took place in 1985. As on the first occasion, the infiltration began in the sewer network of London. But this second invasion was quiet and small scale, and the invaders were Cybermen from more than half a millennium in the future. The Quiet Invasion, Document 2. Commander Lytton was from the star system 690. Human in appearance, perhaps actually human, we do not know, his home planet was Vita 15 satellite Riften 5. The Cybermen knew it as a place of warriors. Lytton himself was an intergalactic mercenary. He had been working for the Daleks in London when they established a time tunnel back to 1984. See Earth document Resurrection of the Daleks. Dr. 5, the Doctor in his 5th reincarnation, closed the tunnel and defeated their evil intentions. Lytton, stranded in the 20th century, set up a distress call in the hope that some intergalactic intelligence would come to his aid and take him back, or rather forward, to his own time and place. To pay for the sophisticated electronics equipment, he had turned his hand to theft. Then, while awaiting rescue, he led a group of 3 men into the sewers, ostensibly to break into the vaults of a diamond bank. But they were not alone in the sewers. A menacing black figure stalked and killed one of the crooks. Then a section of sewer wall swung open to reveal a giant silver figure flanked by 2 others. They were Cybermen, recognizable descendants of those involved in the first invasion, but distantly so. their appearance was altogether more streamlined, more warrior-like, more powerful. The central figure had black markings on the helmet antennae, which designated the higher rank of leader. Taking Litton's gun, the cyber leader demonstrated his immense physical strength as he effortlessly bent and snapped the weapon in two. The Cybermen had set up their base at an intersection of sewer tunnels walled off from the rest of the system. There they prepared for the culmination of their ultimate plan to destroy Earth. Within the cyberbase were chambers where captured humans, or those unlucky enough to stray across the path of the black cyber scouts, were converted into Cybermen. In this way, the cyber forces were increased. When it appeared that they might be killed, or even worse, converted, Litton explained that he was not from Earth. He knew the Cybermen had a chip on the dark side of the moon. He had picked up its transmissions with his advanced communications equipment. He knew what the Cybermen planned and offered to serve their cause. The leader decided to bring Litton and his associate Griffiths before the cyber controller. The fourth member of Litton's gang had escaped and stumbled across a strange couple who were also wandering the sewers. It was Dr. Six and his young American companion, Perpigillion Brown, usually known as Perry. They had been drawn to Earth by Litton's signal, thinking an alien was in need of help. Realizing that Commander Litton, late of the Dalek Task Force, was responsible for the distress signal, they returned to the TARDIS. But Cybermen had already discovered and requisitioned it. The Doctor was forced to set coordinates for the Cybermen's home planet, place, Telos, date, more than 600 years in the future. It seemed to the Doctor that, at the stage in their future for which the TARDIS was making, the Cybermen had discovered how to travel through time, a secret which had always evaded them. But Litton assured him that the Cybermen had merely stolen a time vessel to return to this point in their past. Perry knew nothing of the Cybermen. During their journey to Telos, she learned that its indigenous race had been the Cryons, a technologically advanced people who lived at sub-zero temperatures. In order to live in the warmer areas of their planet, they had become adept at building refrigerated cities. The Cybermen had discovered Telos. They were running out of power and needed to rest. See document 6. And the Cryons' refrigerated cities provided ideal hibernation facilities. The Cryons were destroyed, and the Cybermen adopted Telos as their own. But as the TARDIS leaves Earth 1985 to travel through time and space towards the Telos of the advanced Cybermen's proper time stream, we must part company with it. The story continues in document 9, and it will be resumed as our cyber history nears its end. Thus far, 2 invasions by Cybermen have remained unknown to the vast majority of people on Earth. We now consider an invasion which was to be seared into the collective Earth mind. It was talked of for centuries after. The Destruction of Mondas, document 3. Even as Perry was learning something of the Cybermen's history, their original planet, Mondas, was closing in on Earth. Its intention was to plunder 2 resources vital to its survival: energy and humans. Mondas had long traveled through space, and its own supplies of energy were nearing exhaustion. New sources were desperately needed if the Mondasian Cybermen were to survive. Earth and Mondas had once been twin planets before Mondas had drifted away to the edge of space. Earth would provide the type of energy that had been exhausted on Mondas. Mondas would lock onto the energy latent within Earth and suck it dry, replenishing its own resources and exhausting those of its twin. But this proposed transference held dangers. It was possible that Mondas might be destroyed through absorbing too much energy. Before that point was reached, the Cybermen had to be prepared to destroy Earth. This would be unfortunate. An important bonus in returning to its twin was the mass conversion of the many suitable humans available among Earth's population. However, all activity on the planet, including the Cybermen themselves, was dependent on energy drawn directly from Mondas. It was vital to renew it. Should the danger arise, the logical priority was to save the newly energized Mondas. It was at the end of 1986 that Earth saw the new planet. At that period in its history, Earth astronomers had found and classified 9 planets. The new one was therefore seen as a 10th planet. It was discovered in an orbit between Mars and Venus, when Earth spacecraft Zeus 4 was unexpectedly dragged out of its proper course under the planet's gravitational influence. At Earth's south pole, under the surface of an ice-bound continent known as Antarctica, there was an International Space Command base. Snowcap Tracking Station had been following the course of the craft and now sought to find what was pulling Zeus 4 off course. The endeavor was complicated by the fact that, inexplicably, 3 people had been discovered wandering in the snowy wastes above. It was the Doctor, in his original incarnation, and 2 companions from London, 1966, merchant seaman Ben Jackson and a computer assistant, Polly. All 3 had been bustled unceremoniously into Snowcap and held as prisoners by the irascible head of the station, the American General Cutler. When the new planet was discovered to be fast approaching Earth on an oblique orbit, its land masses were seen to be a reverse image of Earth's. Senior scientist Dr. Barclay pointed out that it could not be a reflection, but he was unable to provide an alternative explanation. The Doctor, however, seemed to know exactly what the planet was and what it brought.
Well, pretty soon we shall be having visitors,
he warned. True to the Doctor's prediction, the visitors soon arrived. One of the Cybermen's craft came to rest beyond where the TARDIS stood. It was entirely different from those which had invaded during the previous decade, and so, too, were the Cybermen which now emerged. Though they were tall, bore antennae at the head and bulky units at the chest, they were closer to human form. Paradoxically, this led to their appearance a more chilling quality. Their separation from humanity was so clearly irrevocable. Cyberman, Document 3, Cybermondasian. The face is swathed in plastic flesh, the human skull beneath still clearly discernible. A cap of skull bone has been removed and replaced by a metal cover, presumably to render the brain more accessible for adjustment. Flesh flaps of human ears have given way to thick antennae, tubes extending from the oral cavities on each side of the head to meet above at a device for gathering energy beamed from Mondas, the energy which keeps them alive. The support system of their exoskeleton, a series of connected metal rings, becomes inactive without Mondasian energy, and the organic remains within helpless. A third tube feeds directly from the lamp-like device above the head to the back of the brain, keeping it plentifully supplied with energy that is as essential to it as oxygen to a human brain. The chest unit, even bulkier than those of the first invasion, is a respiratory aid and might also function as kidney dialyzer and artificial heart. Polly later describes it as replacing their heart and lungs in document 5. It is larger, cuboid, and constructed not of plasticized silvery alloy, but of some transparent material that reveals flashing lights within, to each side of a central vented area, below which is a solitary control knob. Beneath hangs a detachable dish-shaped weapon, again clumsily bulky in comparison with the cyber weapons of the first invasion. Most startling are the hands, human in every detail. How much more of the cyber body remains unchanged from its original human form? But these Cybermen are clearly far from human. Apart from obvious physical adaptations, the brain has also been adjusted to remove certain weaknesses. Entirely logical, it is scoured of human emotion. It is probably in this aspect that Mondasian Cybermen come closest to those of Planet 14. Compared with the monotonous electronic voice of early cyber faction, the Mondasian have a sing-song modulation, an expression more akin to speech which emanates from human thought processes, though undoubtedly produced artificially. Three such figures now strode purposefully towards the TARDIS, where a party of Cutler's men were trying to gain access to the Doctor's machine. Three powerful forearms rose and swiftly fell, smashing into the necks of their horrified victims. The first opposition had been overcome with effortless efficiency. It was the way these Cybermen intended to overcome the whole Earth. Hidden under heavy jackets taken from the bodies of their victims, the three Cybermen gained access to the base. Throwing back the jacket hoods, they revealed their alien features. A soldier instinctively raised his gun at them. Instantly, one of the Cybermen operated the dish-like weapon beneath his chest unit, and a sudden pulse of light eliminated the source of danger and the soldier's life. One of the Cybermen spoke. The aperture that was once a mouth opened and remained unmoving as the emotionless voice emerged. Though the tone was reasonable, the content was highly disturbing to the incredulous human listeners. Mondas was drawing the energy it needed from Earth. Earth would soon become a dead planet. Suitable humans would be able to avoid otherwise certain death on Earth by being taken to Mondas. There, they would be changed into Cybermen. Cybermen had once been exactly like humans, but to combat such weaknesses as a shortening lifespan, the scientists of Mondas had devised spare parts to replace almost all of the human body. Emotions were also considered a weakness, and they were removed from the once human brain.
It is quite useless to resist as we are stronger and more efficient than your people. We must be obeyed.
The Cyberman continued with logical precision.
We have freedom from disease, protection against heat and cold, true mastery. Do you prefer to die in misery?
The humans preferred their misery to the Cyberman's mastery, and by turning the Cyberman's own weapons against them, overcame the three who had entered the base. Zeus 4 had disintegrated under the gravitational effect of Mondas. A relief rocket had been sent up, manned by the General's son, Lieutenant Cutler, but it too was in danger. When Snowcap technicians discovered that a fleet of 250 cyber spacecraft were orbiting Earth, the General decided to destroy Mondas with the Z-bomb, a weapon of total destruction sited at the polar base. Dr. Barclay knew that the radiation released could seriously affect life on Earth, so, encouraged by Polly and assisted by Ben, he rendered the Z-bomb rocket inoperable. Robbed of a means to save his son's life, General Cutler became unbalanced, threatening to shoot his scientists if they did not launch the Z-bomb. When more Cybermen broke into the base, the General was immediately eliminated. The Cybermen then ordered that the warhead be removed to the deepest part of the base, the radiation room. Polly was taken to the cybership as a hostage until this was done. Lieutenant Cutler had observed from his orbiting spacecraft that something strange was happening to Mondas. It was brightening up like a sun and then darkening again. The doctor took this to be the first sign that Mondas was absorbing too much energy. There had been mass landings of Cybermen in many other parts of the Earth. At International Space Command in a European city called Geneva, Secretary General Wigner was replaced by a Cyberman who announced,
I am now controller of the Earth.
Since Mondas was already close to absorbing too much energy from Earth, the controlling Cyberman ordered
The second objective
to be implemented. When the doctor heard that this involved the evacuation of all Cybermen back to Mondas, he realized that they planned to use the Z-bomb, now perfectly sited deep under the Antarctic, to destroy Earth. Mondas would then be fully energized, but safe from the excessive drain from Earth which threatened at any moment to burn up their planet, and which the Cybermen were otherwise powerless to stop. Before being taken hostage himself, he managed to warn Ben and the other Snowcap personnel who had relocated the Z-bomb. Ben deduced that Cybermen must be susceptible to radiation. They had forced humans to move the warhead to the radiation room, even though the operation had to be completed swiftly. Yet their greater strength could have achieved this much more efficiently. By exposing them to isotope rods removed from the Snowcap nuclear reactor, all Cybermen in the base were overcome. A second wave of Cybermen regained control, but it was at this moment that Mondas reached saturation point and began to break up. As their planet cracked, melted, and dispersed into space, Cybermen, dependent on energy from Mondas, collapsed and shriveled. Secretary General Wigner was able to announce,
The Cyberman menace has ended all over the world.
the long journey of Mondas and the Mondasian Cybermen had come to a certain end. For the doctor, whose old body was wearing a bit thin, it was a kind of ending too. Once back in the TARDIS, he collapsed. Before the eyes of his two companions, he underwent a physical transformation. Time Lords may undergo many bodily regenerations. The doctor had undergone his first. He retained his extensive knowledge and 450-year-old memory, but it was housed in a younger body and expressed through an alternative personality. It was in this second embodiment, as Doctor 2, that he met the Cybermen in their first invasion, and it is in this form that he will encounter them in the next 3 episodes of our chronology. Mondas and the Mondasian Cybermen were undoubtedly eradicated. But Cybermen lived on. For Mondasian Cybermen, their planet was their lifeline. The destruction of Mondas meant destruction of the Cyber-Mondasian subspecies. Cyberfaction were more resilient. Each individual Cyberman was dependent only on its own self-contained resources, and each continued selflessly to forward the cyber cause, to survive and conquer. When we next meet the Cybermen, their appearance is close to those of the Cyberfaction who first invaded Earth. It will be recalled that the second wave of the invasion fleet in Document 1 was never launched against the Earth, and never destroyed by Zoe's well-aimed missiles. It is Farazia's contention, one I support, that many of the spacecraft of the second wave were able to evacuate the cyber control ship before it was destroyed by the nuclear warhead. We must assume that the Cybermen who escaped did not get far. Their craft was designed only for the shallows of space between Earth and Moon, based perhaps on the ancient Earth-Mondas hopping technology. Where, then, did this group seek immediate refuge? The obvious answer might be the far side of the Moon. There, they might have recouped and prepared for the return of Mondas, intending within the decade, perhaps, to join with their ancient cousins in final takeover of Earth. The destruction of Mondas was a setback for Cyberfaction. But since they were logical creatures, no contingency had been overlooked. For as long as there existed a community of Cybermen, no matter how small, the cyber cause would be continued. It is at this point, I suggest, that a second divergence within the race was thought necessary. The first divergence had resulted in the related but dissimilar Cyber-Mondasian and Cyberfaction subspecies. Cyber-Mondasian now no longer existed, and Cyberfaction was faced with extinction. Two equally hazardous courses might lead to their continuing survival. A, to pursue the conquest of Earth. B, to leave the solar system and survive through conquest elsewhere. The logical solution was for one group of the survivors to follow course A, another course B. In this way, there was the greatest chance of successful proliferation and ultimate survival. I would postulate that both groups, as soon as they enabled their craft to cover greater distances, initially moved away from the Moon and established themselves more productively in space, utilizing the resources of other moons and asteroids within the solar system. After several decades of intense development, a hyper-driven ship was ready. Group B left the solar system to explore and exploit other planetary systems, establishing over the next centuries their reputation as ruthless and indomitable conquerors throughout the galaxy. Such a missing link, we might call them the subspecies cyber-nomad, would explain much that is mystifying in the later documents. In Document 2, we have seen Cybermen from the future who bear genetic similarities with Cyberfaction. We do not find such similarities in the Cybermen who remained in the solar system over the next century, as they started to alter in appearance and explored extraordinary technologies in order to pursue their specific mission, to conquer Earth. On Earth itself, the Mondasian attack had left the world shaken, but perhaps more united. Though they had come close to global destruction and mass conversion into Cybermen, it was naturally assumed that the cyber race had now, with Mondas, ceased to exist. Many had witnessed the collapse, the shriveling of individual Cybermen as Mondas shattered and dispersed. Could there be more overwhelming evidence that the cyber threat was gone for good? Most were blissfully unaware that Mondas had spawned another cyber culture, that there had been a former invasion of Cybermen markedly different to those from Mondas, and that these Cybermen were even now regrouping, consolidating, and building up their resources to pursue their cause of survival and conquest. The conviction that Cybermen had ceased to exist ran so deep that for some even the name faded in the memory. By the early 21st century, an active space program was underway, though it had its detractors. Opposition, sometimes violent, came from pull-back-to-Earth fanatics and others who wanted to stop the space program and keep Earth for Earth. Nevertheless, exploration pushed outwards. Space stations were built to service and monitor the increasing space traffic. The moon was visited and bases set up on it. Earth humans voyaged at least as far as the asteroid belt. Dr. Gemma Corwin had lost her husband in the asteroid belt. She was second in command of a wheel-shaped space station known as W3, which was probably in orbit between Earth and Moon. Space Station W3, Document 4. It looked as though Dr. Gemma Corwin might have to assume command of the wheel, since its controller, Jarvis Bennett, was showing signs of being unable to cope with recent and bizarre developments. A Phoenix 4 spaceship called Silver Carrier had been discovered almost 90 million miles off course. It was a supply ship for the service station W5 and was apparently crewless. Jarvis wanted to use his new X-ray laser gun to blow it out of existence, in case it might prove a danger to them. Such zeal seemed to Gemma Corwin excessive, and she managed to dissuade him from immediately carrying out his intention. She was thus responsible for saving the lives of Dr. Two and Jamie. They had materialized on the Silver Carrier and needed to find supplies of mercury before the TARDIS would work again. To avoid mercury poisoning, the Doctor had disengaged the time vector generator, thus reducing the inside of the TARDIS to less than its outside dimensions. They had discovered no sign of life on the Silver Carrier, other than a bulky servo robot which seemed to be controlling operations, and no mercury. A wheel search party found them and brought them back for investigation. Jarvis suspected them of being pull-back-to-Earth saboteurs, especially after Jamie, wanting to save the TARDIS from being destroyed along with the Silver Carrier, had damaged the laser gun. It was on this wheel in space that the Doctor and Jamie first met Zoe. She enjoyed their company so much that when they eventually resumed their travels in the TARDIS, she accompanied them as a stowaway. But at that first moment of seeing Jamie, she could not help being amused at his female garments. Affronted, Jamie explained that as a true Great Scot, he wore a kilt. Recalling the term from her considerable knowledge as the Wheel's librarian, Zoe managed at last to suppress her amusement. As a former student of Earth's School of Parapsychology, many years of her young life had been devoted to the pursuit of pure logic and intellectual studies. With Jamie and the Doctor, she was to learn that emotions were important too, while her contact with the Cybermen was to teach her the drawbacks of single-minded devotion to logic. When she took Jamie on a guided tour of the wheel, thoughts of Cybermen could not have been further from her mind. In fact, like Gemma Corwin and Jarvis Bennett himself, she had little knowledge of the Mondasian invasion. As she said,
Pre-century history is my field, you see.
the functions of the wheel were as follows. A. Radio-visual relay station for Earth. B. Halfway house for deep spaceships. C. Space research station, for example, interstellar flora. D. Stellar phenomena early warning station. E. Advanced weather reporting for Earth. Because the wheel carried out so many important functions, it was understandable that Jarvis should be sensitive to the phenomena that now threatened its operation. The position of the silver carrier was still unaccounted for. 2 suspected saboteurs had been uncovered. There were temporary faults in the station's system and drops in air pressure. Moreover, Zoe predicted that a star, Hercules 208 in Messier 13, was going nova. The radiation flux would deflect meteors directly towards the wheel. Without the X-ray laser, their only protection was the convolute force field, a neutron barrier that would prove ineffective for meteors of above 200 tons. The laser gun was repaired at last, but a strange form of space bug was found to have consumed the wheel's entire stock of beryllium, essential for powering the laser. Jarvis was relieved when a large crate of the mineral was discovered aboard the silver carrier, and gave permission for it to be brought to the wheel. But his troubles were far from over. The dead body of a crew member was found next to a mound of solidified hyperoxide plastic. X-rays of the indestructible material revealed a space bug at its center. The doctor immediately recognized it as a cybermat, a kind of cybernetic rodent which he had confronted before in the tombs on Telos, document 6. He knew now that Cybermen were to blame for the series of unaccountable incidents. He knew also that there was some kind of invasion plan behind the apparent coincidences. It wasn't just the wheel they were after.
The Cybermen need to colonize.
He said.
They must have the treasures of Earth.
Psychotropic drugs protected all space workers against brain control, but they did not provide a complete barrier. An adverse influence could still be identified, however, by implanted Zelensky capsules, and these indicated that some crew members were under cyber-hypnotic control. The Cybermen must already have found a way onto the wheel. The doctor hurriedly demonstrated a crude but effective method for blocking cyber-hypnosis, a metal plate and transistor taped to the back of the neck, a method he was to deploy, as we have seen, in the first invasion. When the doctor learnt that beryllium had been brought into the space station from the silver carrier, he immediately guessed how the Cyberman might have got on board. He and Jamie went to the hold to inspect the beryllium crate. Suddenly, they were aware that they were not alone and hid behind the crate. The tall figure of a Cyberman walked past them and out of the hold. But they were not quite out of danger, for as the doctor was alerting the rest of the wheel via his radio link, 2 cybermats appeared. Ordering a variable audio frequency to be put out on the communications channel, the doctor caused the destruction of all the cybermats on the space station. Cyberman, Document 4, Late Cyberfaction. There is a direct correspondence between the Cybermen of Document 1 and Document 4. The differences are these. The striated blocks on each side of the head are gone. In addition to larger teardrop holes at the eyes, there is also one at the mouth slit. exoskeletal supports to the limbs have become less delicate. A series of rods powered by blocks at the limb joints. Fibrillary piping extends from top to bottom of the chest units. The units themselves appear identical. In all other respects, too, the Cybermen are identical, except for one significant detail. The hands are no longer clearly five-fingered. On first view, they might be said to be three-fingered. Closer scrutiny reveals something stranger. 3 fingers are being formed out of what was originally a 5-fingered hand. Each of 2 pairs of fingers are forced together into single channels and topped with a metal cap. The thumb, similarly capped, makes up the 3rd finger. The exoskeletal powering rods no longer stop at the wrist, as with the early cyberfaction, but now extend to the 3 fingers. One explanation may be this. The Cybermondasian retains use of the human hands. Nerves, tendons, muscles, stimulated directly perhaps by a cybernetically assisted arm. Becoming independent of Mondas, cyberfaction evolves further from the human form and has encased the hand in armored material which now covers the entire body. These organic remnants might now be losing their capacity to be stimulated and are being evolved into the more easily synthesized, because less intricate, 3-fingered variety. It seems that full 5-finger synthesis is achieved by the more sophisticated cybernomad, as we shall see. Undetected by the wheel, but in its vicinity, there was a large cybership, long and narrow, encrusted with antennae at its bulbous central section. Within were many smaller craft which could only enter Earth's atmosphere by homing in on a radio beam. There was also a device, very like Vaughan's coordinator, which controlled operations. The Cybermen's intended invasion of Earth was plainly similar in plan to the first invasion. Using extraordinary technology which the Cybermen might have developed over the period of consolidation, 2 spheres on board the Silver Carrier were activated and began to grow. In chilling parody of organic birth, each full womb disgorged a fully formed Cyberman, perfect in every detail. They proceeded to monitor each phase of the plan and relay information to Cyber Control. When the monitoring Cyberman reported that all Cybermats had been destroyed by high current phase contrast, the coordinator deduced that
one human has knowledge beyond our presumption.
By the time they discovered it was the Doctor, he had set up a neutron force field around the operation room.
The Doctor is known and recorded an enemy,
the coordinator announced.
He must be lured outside the force field and destroyed.
In the power room, the Doctor was confronted by 2 Cybermen come to destroy him because he knew their ways. He was able to electrocute one of the Cybermen, but the other, having impassively observed the fate of his companion, went to open the wheel's airlock. The Cyber Control ship had moved close, and Cybermen were spacewalking across to the station. Hurriedly fixing his time vector generator to the X-ray gun to boost its power, the Doctor obliterated the cybership, then used the force field to fling the spacewalking Cybermen into the depths of space. The Cybermen were thus defeated, not only in their attack on Space Station W3, but also in their greater purpose, what the Doctor described as...
They have an overriding ambition to invade the Earth, plunder its mineral wealth.
The Doctor was again to prove a resourceful opponent in the Cybermen's next attempt to pursue their overriding ambition. The scene of this encounter is set some 4 decades on, in 2070 AD. For 20 years or more, a dome on the moon had housed the gravitron, a device able to direct gravitational forces at specific areas of Earth in order to control its tides, and through them to control the weather. The Moon Base, Document 5. In contrast to the Cybermen's attempt on Earth via the wheel, their present approach was simple.
We are here to take over the gravitron and use it to destroy the surface of the Earth by changing the weather.
It would seem that after the failure of their attempt to launch an invasion fleet at an inhabited Earth, they had decided to annihilate the opposition before setting boot on the place. Besides, we learn from Document 6 that their previous defeats had left them in an impoverished state.
Our machinery had stopped and our supply of replacements been depleted.
So, the Cybermen intended to wreak, in a matter of hours, such destruction on Earth as Mondas had endured over centuries as it moved away from the sun. Widespread disaster could result merely from switching the gravitron off. Hobson, the man in charge of operations at the moon base, described it in these terms.
The collapse of the gravity would devastate half the globe. There'd be storms, whirlwinds, hurricanes.
Earth was clearly vulnerable to malfunction in the gravitron, and Hobson was understandably worried when a mystery illness began to strike down members of his team, some of whom subsequently vanished. The Doctor had wandered into this situation with companions Polly and Ben, and also Jamie, who had not long been traveling with them. Hobson at first regarded them all with suspicion and wanted them off the moon. The Doctor was himself immediately suspicious of the strange circumstances and determined to seek the explanation.
There are some corners of the universe which have bred the most terrible things.
He explained.
Things which act against everything that we believe in. They must be fought.
So saying, he engaged his disciplines as a trained medical doctor.
Glasgow, 1888, I think. Lister.
And eventually discovered that the base's supplies of sugar had been contaminated with a neurotropic virus, an infective agent that attacked the nerves. Polly had earlier thought she might have glimpsed in the sickbay something that reminded her of the Cybermen. She, Ben, and the Doctor, in their peculiar time stream, had encountered them only months before, when Mondas had been destroyed. The Doctor was now convinced that Cybermen were involved, that they had deliberately infected the base. Hobson had been highly skeptical at Polly's first mention of Cybermen.
Stop this Cyberman nonsense.
He had said.
There were Cybermen. Every child knows them, but they were all destroyed ages ago.
But Polly and the Doctor were proved correct when Cybermen turned up in the base itself. These Cybermen have evolved into a fully three-fingered variety, with a mouth slit that opens for a monotonous, simulated voice to emanate. The Doctor was immediately recognized by one of them. In describing how they had gained access to the base, its manner might have seemed gloating, if such an attitude were not known to be redundant in the Cybermen.
It was very simple. Only stupid Earth brains like yours would have been fooled. Since we couldn't approach direct, We came up under the surface and cut our way through your storeroom, contaminating your food supplies on the way.
The Cybermen had brought with them the infected men who had disappeared from the base. They had been altered, in the Cybermen's ominous phraseology, and were now under cyber control. They were sent into the gravitron room to begin the destruction of Earth, not to seek revenge, as Hobson suggested they were doing. Having no feelings, the very concept of revenge was alien to them, but in order to eliminate all dangers to their conquest of Earth. As with the Mondasian invasion, it was the ingenuity of Polly and Ben, rather than the Doctor, who was under cyber scrutiny, which, in the first instance, overcame the Cybermen. Mixing a Polly cocktail of various solvents, they managed to spray it into the chest units of all the Cybermen in the base. The Cybermen immediately collapsed and expired as the plastic of their synthetic hard-lung units dissolved. Hobson could once more take up command of the gravitron. Fortunately, it had not yet done any great damage on Earth. The small ship in which the Cybermen had arrived was detected about 3 kilometers from the base. Another spacecraft was also detected, a relief ship from Earth. Although it had the weapons to blast the Cybermen and their spaceship to Kingdom Come, it was not to do so. The Cybermen, who had not fully relinquished mind control over some of the altered men in the base, directed one of them, Dr. Evans, to operate the gravitron and deflect the relief ship towards the sun and certain destruction. Under siege in the moon base, the humans still refused to give in to the Cybermen, even when 2 more cybercraft landed and a bazooka-type weapon was deployed. A hole already punctured in the dome by a cyber laser had been stopped up with a plastic tray. The cyber bazooka also proved ineffective, since it was deflected by the force field of the gravitron. But this gave the Doctor the idea of aiming the gravitron at the Cybermen and their craft. As the Cybermen approached the base for a final onslaught, they and their 3 ships were lifted from the moon's surface and carried out into space. They may even have followed the fateful path to which they had condemned the relief ship. For as the Doctor and his companions returned to the TARDIS, Polly pointed out a comet-like object which glowed in the sky as it hurtled towards the sun.
Doctor, look! Could that be them?
She said.
Possibly.
He replied.
And I hope it's the last we see of them.
For the next 400 years, the people of Earth saw and heard nothing of Cybermen.
The Doctor's hope seemed well-founded. But they had not died out. They had merely ceased to be active within the solar system.